Bronco now to the left for Namdar. Cha-Cha with Brian Quinn at the right wing. Brings it into the zone down the left side. Namdar across for Segota. Bronco up the middle. Gets some room. Segota shoots it left foot and it goes off 12 and wide. There's Segota. Scores! What a goal for Bronco Segota. The pass from Perez. Sockers win in overtime.
Hello once again, everybody. Welcome to Soccer's Overtime and our continuing Legends series as we turn back the clock and we look at the heyday of the great sport of indoor soccer. Craig Elsten back with you. And I can't tell you what a privilege it is as a guy who's been calling soccer games since 2009 to have the chance to share a screen with the man who made it an art form in the 1980s. Randy Hahn, the voice of the San Diego Sockers from 1982 to 1992, is our guest here on the Soccer's Overtime Legends series. Randy, from down here in San Diego, thanks so much for the time.
Oh, my pleasure, Craig. Great to see you, although virtually as it is, and we're all forced to do that right now. But looking forward to talking some old MISL, NASL, and of course, San Diego Soccer's days.
Yeah, looking forward to jogging some memories out of your cranium.
We'll see how that goes.
Well, you know, here's a place to start. As a native Canadian and a guy who's obviously now spent decades, and you know, you're known as the voice of the San Jose Sharks. You've been an NHL voice for decades now. Tell folks how you first got into calling soccer back then.
Well, it goes back to about 1979 when I was in my hometown, Edmonton. I was working in my first TV job. Prior to that, I had worked in radio in Vancouver, and I had started to cover the NASL, just covering the Whitecaps as a reporter for the Vancouver radio stations that I worked for. So I was already getting into the soccer mode, and at that time, Vancouver had a really good team. The Whitecaps won the Soccer Bowl one of the years that I was there. And then I got the job in Edmonton, and the Edmonton Drillers were in the NASL at that time. And if you go back, they used to be the Oakland Stompers, which comes back to where I am now, to the Bay Area. And that franchise moved to Edmonton and became the Drillers. So initially I was just a TV sportscaster in Edmonton and radio, and I wasn't involved directly with the soccer team except covering them in the first year. And then that first season that I was in Edmonton, so it would have probably been the 1981 NASL outdoor season, the Edmonton Drillers made the outdoor playoffs. And our regular soccer play-by-play guy on TV, Al McCann, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but back in those days, he was the voice of the Edmonton Drillers on TV. He had a prior commitment and couldn't attend a playoff game in Houston, Texas. So I was going to be doing this game on radio. It wasn't going to be a TV game, but they needed somebody to go to Houston. They let me know that at 11 o'clock the night before. So to get from Edmonton to Houston isn't that easy. So I believe it was Edmonton, Calgary, Chicago, Houston. Landed in Houston in the middle of the summer, which was like, coming from Edmonton, it was like stepping into a sauna. And basically dropping my bags at the hotel and directly going to the Houston Astrodome to call this NASL outdoor playoff game, the first soccer game I had ever called in my life. Well, thankfully it was on radio. I had a color guy who was a DJ at the radio station. He wasn't a normal color commentator either. Somehow we made it through that first broadcast. And fortunately, the team won. And when your team wins, when the team you're broadcasting for wins, that covers up a lot of the mistakes. So everybody was enthused, excited. I went back to Edmonton. The next week, the team was going to be on TV playing in Fort Lauderdale. So they asked me to accompany the team to Fort Lauderdale and do the sideline reporting, where I promptly was pelted with ice cubes by the crowd when they found out I was the opposing team's sideline reporter. But long story short, the next season, the Drillers decided to play indoor, and I got an opportunity to do those broadcasts. And then in 1982, they folded that franchise, 81, 82. and the San Diego Soccer's play-by-play job on radio and TV came available. I applied for it. I had already been, traveling to San Diego as an Edmonton broadcaster for a couple of seasons. I knew Bill Hansen, who at that time was one of the executives for the San Diego Sockers. He liked me. He called me one day. He said, "How would you like to be our new radio play-by-play guy?" Because the guy who had been doing it, John DeMott, was doing the Charger games, and the indoor soccer, along with his other commitments, just became too much for him to handle. So they offered me the job. I took a huge cut in pay to go, but I really did want to work in a U.S. market. And in that fall of 1982, I drove from Edmonton to San Diego. I got to San Diego on Halloween night of 1982. And about a week later, we opened our first ever MISL season, the 82-83 season. We would go back to the NASL indoor the next year,
right.
But we opened that first season, and it couldn't have been a more fortunate move for me, because the Sockers won the championship in their first year in the MISL, as you well know.
Absolutely. In fact, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, we've been doing a whole retro series. We did Best of San Diego versus Baltimore, and that 1982-1983 final, that championship third game, it continues to blow my mind, Randy, many decades later, that in a one-goal game, Ron Newman pulled his keeper with a power play to go to what you called the super power play, the 6v4, emptying his net with a lead in I think the late third quarter of a championship game. And those were the type of strategies that I think drew people to the sport so quickly.
Yeah, Ron was the great innovator. He and Kenny Cooper kind of both went at it as to who could come up with things that were more innovative and go back and forth. It was the beginning of probably the soccer's best rivalry in the MISL. It seemed like we were meeting Baltimore in big playoff games all the time, and Newman and Cooper, both being Englishmen, would go at one another with the media, and I think half of it was just some fun to stir up interest in a fairly new pro sport. But there was a real rivalry there. And I listened occasionally to my final moments call of the Sockers winning that championship, and I'm losing my mind. And it, no, it wasn't the Stanley Cup. No, it wasn't the Super Bowl. But as far as I was concerned, and I'm trying to remember, it was 11,161 or 192 or something that literally sold out San Diego Arena every game. For all of us, it was the biggest thing, because it was a new league, and we were the new kids in this new league, an existing league, but we were the new kids on the block, and to win that championship. And I believe Addy Coker might have scored the winning goal. I remember him being lifted up on the shoulders of his teammates as the Sockers went around the arena after winning that game. It was the most thrilling moment for sure in my life, although a brief career at that time in my early 20s in broadcasting. It was absolutely phenomenal.
When you think back to those days, here's indoor soccer, a sport that was relatively new, popular in the MISL in the late 70s with the New York Arrows and whatnot. Obviously, the NASL had its outdoor presence at that time. But why do you think San Diegans took to indoor so quickly, to the sport? Obviously, the team was good and they won, but what do you think drew them to the sport?
Well, I think probably a number of things. The Clippers were not a hugely successful NBA team, and of course, during those early years of the Sockers, they would end up moving to LA. So the competition in the building wasn't as great. There was no hockey team. And it was affordable. The ticket prices were much lower than to go to a Chargers game or even a Padres game, for that example. It was a family atmosphere. You could, throw all the kids in the van and drive down to the arena and wait for the Kobe swap meet to close up, and then you could park and go into the arena. The players were accessible. They they didn't wear masks. They didn't have big, huge, bulky equipment. They looked like normal you and me kind of people. And then they were successful. And I was with the team for 10 years and ended up with 9 championship seasons when I was there. So you combine all those things into a cocktail together, and the fact that it wasn't a 3 or a 4 hour time expenditure. It wasn't tough to park. You could go to the game. If kickoff was 7:35, you knew you were going to be out of there by 9:30. It all added up to a fun, affordable, and as it turned out, a very exciting experience because of all the great personalities and the great teams that the Sockers had.
Yeah, I just continue to think about that question, Randy, because of course in modern times, it is a very different world in terms of the bandwidth of every person's attention span, the number of sports they have access to, and of course, the amount of access that you have. You know, an NHL fan back in 1983 couldn't pray to watch every game of every team, you know, never mind MLB, NBA, et cetera. So obviously the sports world is so much more stratified now than it was then, but at the same time, indoor soccer was such a different kind of wacky and unseen sport. And that's what always makes me wonder, like, how did people the first time they went in walk and go, yeah, okay, I'm in?
Yeah, I think a fair bit of it was word of mouth, and just within the soccer playing community, youth soccer and adult soccer. I think that kind of got it going before I got there for that 82 season. And, the Sockers had won the NASL indoor, I believe, the year before. Or been in it. I'm just trying to remember. I remember Peter Skouras being carried off the plane by his teammates, and I think it was a championship that year before the MISL year. But there was already a bit of a track record. But you're right. There was no ability to log on to a computer and watch other games. There was no such thing as cell phones. There was no such thing as social media, thank God, because we would have all been ruined had there been. It is an anomaly, if you will, that San Diegans, took to this franchise and this team in such a passionate way, but they sure did. And it was a combination of reasons that it was successful, at least attendance-wise, if not as a business-wise. You could probably have Bob Bell come on, the owner of the Sockers back then, and tell a much different story of how much money he lost. But it was very interesting how the city of San Diego and the region really latched onto the team.
Now, part of course, the growth of indoor soccer was the fact that there was the growth at that time of cable television and cable TV just coming into its own, a need for content, something that, of course, we experienced decades down the road with the explosion of the internet. But as such, as I'm watching all these old highlights, Randy, I see USA Network one year, and then it moved on to Prime Ticket, Home Sports Entertainment in Dallas. You guys had a local cable channel with the Kobe Swap Meet scoreboard and the Video Library scoreboard.
Cox Cable.
That's exactly it. So what was that like as a broadcaster, kind of navigating through the waters of so many different channels and outlets to cover the sport?
Well, for us, primarily, it was the Cox Cable package. And then when Prime Ticket invested in indoor soccer and decided to cover our sport and our league, and in particular our team, and then later the LA Lasers, it really raised the bar production value wise. We were now being produced by the same channel that was producing the Lakers. And they were doing it in the same way because they wanted that consistent look on their channel. They didn't want you to switch from watching an NBA game and then going to an MISL game and saying, oh, this looks minor league. They wanted to maintain that major league look to it. And thankfully, they were very consistent in that. the kind of producers and directors we had, and the additional content of studio hosts and the kind of things that we were able to do on that channel, I think really took it to another level. And it made watching a soccer game like it was cool, because it was the same as watching a Lakers game or something like that. You didn't feel like you were a second-class citizen as far as sports fan goes. And I think that was really important for establishing the credibility of the league, but especially in our market for the team.
I think that's actually that's a terrific point, because when people watch the same channel and they see League X and League Y, there's going to be that inherent nature to conflate the two and say these are both leagues on my station. These must both be major leagues. That must have been critically important. From the national side, one thing I've heard talking to a couple of the other legends was how it kind of moved around, and we mentioned there was USA one year and then it wasn't. Was that one of the issues for MISL, not getting a consistent national outlet?
Yes, it was. And, I think part of the problem was having the major markets have established and solid franchises. The New York situation bounced around from the Arrows, and then the Cosmos tried indoor, but their hearts were never really in it. I remember doing a game at Madison Square Garden, and I think between the two teams and the ushers and the amount of security people it took to open up Madison Square Garden, there were more of us than there were fans. And then Chicago, the Sting had some success indoors, but it wasn't huge. And the Lasers had their moments here and there when they got some crowds, but it wasn't where they needed to be. So your hot spots were places like San Diego, Kansas City, Baltimore, Wichita. And these aren't huge television markets. They aren't even now. They were then, even smaller than they are now. And it caused the network television executives to kind of treat it in a different way. And it was more of a novelty sport. And it would pop up on CBS even sometimes. Then it would be on USA. It did bounce around, move around. I think eventually ESPN did some coverage as well, but they never really established themselves with a network that stuck with them over a long period of time. And that certainly was one of the problems, to then attract sponsors that would drive a national league of 14, 16 teams consistently. And then you had the ownership issues. Some teams were very well financed and had great ownership, and then others didn't. The league at the time was allowing people to own teams that really didn't have deep enough pockets to sustain losses for a couple of years, and then those teams would fold or move, and there was a lot of shifting and transferring of franchises. So all of those factors led, I think, to certainly an underwhelming amount of success at the national TV level.
Fascinating insight, Randy. And one of the things that I see as well when I go back, and I'm doing obviously a lot of research of this era of indoor history, is that the talent pool for the MISL and the NASL before that was of a clearly higher level, because there was no MLS. There was no, NASL was the established outdoor league. And then that basically folded into the early 80s. And then you had indoor as essentially the primary soccer league, professional soccer league in the United States of America. So that created great talent to be available, from a Julie V to a Kaz Data to a Steve Jungle, et cetera, but also some pretty big salaries that it turned out came with those guys, even for the 1980s. And I sometimes wonder about that, if the MISL was playing a little over their skis, so to speak, financially.
Yeah, they probably were. I remember with Bronco Segota, Steve Jungle, and we're talking in the mid 80s, they were making probably upwards of $200,000 a year, a season. And that was big bucks. Most of the guys in the league were probably making 40 or 50,000 a year. But they paid more for the star power, which was also a mistake that the NASL made in overpaying for some over-the-hill stars. But the beauty of the indoor game is you could bring some of these guys in, like Kaz Dana, who you could argue, based on his international pedigree as a Polish international, was the greatest player that ever laced up the boots in San Diego as a soccer player, Hugo
Yeah.
Sanchez before that. But, Kaz Dana was a world-class midfielder. There was no question about it. But in the outdoor game, though his best days were behind him. But in a shrunk down, slowed down version of the outdoor game at the indoor level, Kazi was brilliant. He was back to the way he would dominate in the outdoor game when he was young, or even more so. It was just an amazing thing to watch him play. And then you throw in somebody like Julie V, whose skill set was perfectly suited for the indoor game, and then Segota, and then all the other great talents that we had, and that even extended into the goaltending realm in the early years. Volkmar Gross, and then later, whether it was Alan Mayer or Jim Gorsuch or Zoltan Toth. These guys were all amazing athletes. So, yeah, I think the league did overpay, and that probably shortened the lifespan of some of the franchises. And most often than not, for the teams other than the San Diego Sockers, when those teams overpaid for players, it was because they were trying to knock the Sockers off their perch, because we were a very frustrating franchise for everybody else in the league, because all we did was ever win every year. I was there 10 years, and we won the championship 9 times. And for some of the other owners, like in Cleveland and Baltimore and other places like that, ownership threw up their hands and just said, we can't beat this team. And some teams even, I think, folded because of it.
That is fascinating. You talk about teams that would overspend to try and beat the Sockers. And I think there's a very famous example of that in the 1984-85 season, which was the one season of the Las Vegas Americans. And they picked up Julie V. And Julie has personally told me this story about, I think it was a $200,000 contract, and he got some sort of convertible as well. Alan Mayer, Martin Donnelly all went to Vegas and kind of propped up a franchise for 1 year. Next year, casino guy, he's out of there.
Yeah, that was a crazy, crazy year for us to see. Some of the most beloved Sockers in those early years of the indoor team and outdoor. There was a couple of years there where we were playing both indoor and outdoor, which was absolutely crazy. And I think there wasn't one season there was barely a break in between, or we might have even been playing in both leagues at the same time, whether it was at Jack Murphy Stadium back then or at the Sports Arena. But yeah, it was a bizarre year. And that's actually, Vegas brings up a memory. It's where I made one of my biggest on-air faux pas as the Sockers broadcaster. We were doing a pre-tape, and it was something we were pre-recording that we were going to run at the opening of the telecast.
Yeah.
And I flubbed up my lines. And in flubbing up my lines, I also used the F word, knowing that this was never going to make it to air because we were going to record take 2. So we recorded take 2, and everything was fine. And I went back up to the booth, and I'm watching this game open play back now. Now we're live, but they're playing the recorded open. And I'm going, oh my God, I think this is the first one. And sure enough, they had queued up the wrong one. And I stopped down in the middle of it because I flubbed up my lines. And I said, oh, well, it's just as well because my hair's all effed up anyway. And I would say for about the next 5 or 6 years, whenever I'd walk through the sports arena, Sockers fans would ask me how my hair was.
Oh, my God. Wow. That's a good thing you're on cable.
Yeah. It didn't seem to matter. Everybody heard about it. But that broadcast was in Las Vegas. So certainly an unforgettable a few broadcasts from Vegas.
Oh my goodness, that is you never know what's going to come back bouncing out of your cranium once we start thinking about that. Working for the Sockers organization at that time, what was that experience like as a young broadcaster, traveling with these guys, being a part of this whole experience?
Well, when I first came in the fall of '82, I was the sports director at KSON, the country station, still there.
Yep.
I'm not sure if it's still in Lemon Grove, but that's where it was when I started there in the fall of '82, an AM/FM country station, and they carried our game that year, but only until the playoffs. And oddly, they dropped the broadcasts right before the playoffs, which was, we went on to win. And I think we went to KLZZ after that, Kogo at the time, their
Right.
AM/FM outlet, and they ended up picking us up for the playoffs. And then, as it turned out, for many years after that on radio. But it was unique. I went from being the sports director at KSON, and then once they dropped the broadcast, they didn't need me anymore to do sports because they weren't carrying the games. So then I became an employee of the team, and I was the PR director and also the voice on radio and TV. And on a lot of the radio games, I didn't have a color commentator, so I was alone. I would prepare all the game notes earlier in the day. They would all have to be photocopied to hand out to the media. I would make sure everybody had their credentials and all that stuff. Then I would go to the arena 2 or 3 hours before the game, carrying my own equipment, setting it up, engineering my own broadcast. I remember an outdoor game at at Jacksonville, Florida. We were playing they were the Jacksonville Teemen, because they had moved from New England, I think. So they were the Jacksonville Teemen, which was a bizarre name. But it was in the middle of the summer, and I was in a booth just above field level. And right before halftime, the power to the city of Jacksonville went out. But I had a backup battery power source, so I was still on the air. So the stadium is pitch black, the game stops, and I've now got to fill what turned out to be about 40 minutes of airtime. So I literally dropped my crowd microphone down from that little elevated wooden broadcast booth, which was right on the field, and just motioned to our players to just come and talk to me for a bit and hand it to the next guy. And I did about 7 or 8 interviews for 40 minutes until the lights came on, and then we just kept on trucking. But we did talk shows. We were tape delayed a lot of the time. One of my favorite stories, and I hope he'll get the sense of humor out of this now, but Wad Hermes, who was a tremendously popular San Diego Sockers player, and he just had a booming shot and just a great personality. He still lives in San Diego. We were doing a game one day, and I think we were in Wichita. By the way, I figured out once I've spent 77 days of my life in Wichita. But anyway, we were playing in Wichita, and I was down at the lobby to go to the arena at about 4:30, and some of the guys were leaving then in a cab. And he looks at me and he says, "Where are you going? It's only 4:30. I said, "Well, I'm going to the arena for the game." And in all seriousness, he says, "Why are you going so early? I thought it was tape delayed." He just didn't get the concept of tape delay. He thought it somehow was going to be delayed in Wichita. And of course it was delayed at the other end when they played it in San Diego. But oh my God, it was the greatest memories of the broadcasting was the travel. Yeah. Because unlike today, when all pro sports teams pretty much now charter, it's virtually impossible to travel in team sports on commercial airplanes. This is pre-COVID, of course. We'll have to see going forward. But, we flew commercial, and it wasn't always the nonstop flight. Sometimes we had to book the cheapest flight. So there were lots of changes of planes and waiting in airports. And those were the fun times, because that's when all the guys would have a couple of hours to kill in an airport. And that's when all the hijinks and the kibitzing would go on. And just sitting back and observing all these guys from all over the world, pulling pranks on people in airports and just killing time and being hilarious. Those are some of the best memories.
And, I'm going to make sure I save that clip for our players, too, when they complain about our commercial travel, just to remind them that the more things change, just like when you were saying the story about being there 3 hours before, getting the press notes taken care of, setting up your booth and getting ready. I'm like, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there would be like 20 of us in the traveling party with the trainers and coaches and broadcasters, and they'd have us all in one part of the plane. And as soon as the flight attendant would go through the seatbelt explanation, we'd all click our seatbelts. And then she'd hold up the instruction card and everybody would hold up the card and the plane would start laughing. And then she'd hold up the oxygen thing and all the guys would sort of, and this would go on for every flight. And we were loud and noisy and playing cards, and there were probably unpleasant odors on that plane and everything else. But because the guys were so funny, they usually won everybody over on the flight because they were just so hilarious.
Oh, that is amazing. As you're going through this amazing decade of major indoor soccer league action, and as you mentioned, I mean, the broadcaster's dream, you have literally 1 year where you don't win it. You make the playoffs and don't win it, right? And every other year, you're going to find a way to win it at the end. Meanwhile, Baltimore is strong. A couple franchises are strong. And otherwise, like you said, 1 year we're here. 1 year that place is gone. The next year we're going over here. Was there a feeling of uncertainty or of the ground shifting under you as the Sockers are riding high?
Not until the end of my time there around 91, 92.
Yeah.
You could sense some of the enthusiasm in some of the marketplaces just, draining a little bit. Not so much in San Diego, but I remember going to St. Louis for years, and this is before they moved into the arena they're in now. It was the old Checker Dome, as it was called, a building that was owned by the Purina dog food company. And at that time, the St. Louis Steamers were averaging 18,000 fans per game. And the St. Louis Blues back then, the NHL team, was only averaging about 11 or 12. I mean, they were just killing it at the gate. Kansas City as well, very successful and popular. And Cleveland had a good run too. But then Cleveland started to lose some of their enthusiasm. And St. Louis, the crowd started to dip. And, I really feel still it was just this juggernaut San Diego team that over a decade, in some ways, almost hurt the league more than helped it because of this, domination by one franchise where even the fans started to get discouraged after a while. I think in retrospect, if you're going to be really honest about it, what the Sockers did in those early years of dominating for 9 years out of 10 probably wasn't good for the long-term health of the league, even though it was great for us in San Diego.
And it's fascinating you say that because so many times when I've spoken to Julie, he brings up a phrase and he says, we always used to say this. We lost a game, we say, lose a game, save a franchise.
Right. I forgot that one. There were so many other ones, but so many other sayings. And whether it was Gene Wilrich, his favorite was Abahalo. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but and there were many others that I can't repeat on this broadcast. But no, it's so true. When teams would beat us, they felt some hope. But that wasn't very often.
Not very often at all, indeed. Now, in your personal career, I'm just curious, as a native Canadian, in the back of your mind, were you was the NHL always a goal for you?
It probably was in the back of my mind, but being in San Diego, it wasn't a realistic goal because there was no indication that the NHL was going to expand to San Diego, and they still haven't. The lack of arena being the primary reason for that. But what it did do for me being on Prime Ticket was expose me to the Prime Ticket executives, et cetera. And my work with the Sockers on Prime Ticket led to them using me on the LA Kings broadcasts for 2 years as the pre-game, intermission, and post-game host. And that was sort of my entree to the NHL as a broadcaster. And were it not for me being the Sockers broadcaster, I'm not sure I would have ever realized the Canadian boy's dream of working or playing in the NHL. And I was never good enough to even have a hope of coming close to playing in the NHL. But, I think that especially when I worked in the NHL prior to coming to San Diego on radio in Vancouver and Edmonton, and I wasn't doing play-by-play then. I was doing, pre-games and things like that. I loved it. And I didn't give up the dream of being in the NHL by going to San Diego, but I certainly didn't expect the San Diego experience to lead me back to the NHL. But as it turned out, that's exactly what happened with the Kings, and then eventually with the Sharks. As unbelievably, once we start, and we think it'll be January 1st, I'll be starting my 30th year with the Sharks.
Congratulations, Sharks Voice, at Shark Voice. That is amazing. Two very brief follow-ups to that, and this is almost coming from a personal point of broadcasting privilege here. As a guy who also made a transition from soccer, I got to spend a few years announcing the American Hockey League Gulls. Did you find that transition from a very fast indoor sport to literally the fastest sport on earth in terms of the movement of the puck and using a frictionless surface, did you find that your skill set aided you in that transition, or was it a transition that involved some lumps?
You know what? It was almost seamless for me, I'll be honest with you, because, as you know, calling the indoor game, number one, it's on a hockey rink, and you put AstroTurf down over the hockey rink. And then you have three forwards in hockey, two defenders, two defensemen in hockey. And the only difference in the goalie in indoor is that the goal is cut into the end boards. And in the NHL, the goal is a net. So, just the movement of the ball, and you can hear my dog in the background. I apologize.
That's all good.
The movement of the ball in many ways simulated the movement of the puck in hockey. So when I did get that first opportunity to broadcast in the NHL, interestingly, I did not work in the American Hockey League. I didn't work in the East Coast League. My minor league prep, if you will, was doing the San Diego Sockers games. And then the Sharks did need a demo tape from me of hockey. So Don Waddell, who's now the president and general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes, at that time was he might have been the GM I think he was, of the Gulls. And he allowed me to set up my equipment in the stands to do a broadcast of a Gulls game. And that was the tape I sent to the Sharks that ultimately convinced them to let me be on the air with them. That's
a great story. I'm so glad I was able to get that story out of you. Wrapping things up here with you, Randy, I think you made an incredible point about how the Sockers may have actually driven a stake a little bit into MISL. That problem doesn't exist in the current MISL, where the franchises are swapping championships. The Sockers are looking for their first since 2013. So we've kept the league nice and hungry, and we haven't gobbled up all the cake ourselves. Maybe it's even an unfair question, but what advice would you have for the sport going forward to try and reestablish its footing in a firmer fashion? It's still around, it's still there. We're living in a completely different sports universe now that we talked about. But what if any, advice would you have?
Well, first of all, I would say that if there was one singular reason that the Sockers had that decade of domination, which, as you alluded to, might have hurt the MISL more than helped it, and that was Ron Newman. He was the architect of the team. He found the players. We didn't have a classic GM like you have in sports now, where the GM goes and acquires the players and the coach just coaches them. Ron found the players, and he had contacts around the world to find these unbelievably talented individuals who could come together despite having feuds, crazy personalities. Once they got onto the field, Newman had the knack of keeping them all together, keeping them from ripping each other's throats out and winning championships. And the one thing that always puzzled me was these owners would spend all this money to try and get these players to beat the Sockers, but no one ever tried to steal Ron Newman away from the Sockers with some huge contract. Ultimately, he did go to the MLS with Kansas City, but looking back, I would say, if you want to beat San Diego, take Ron Newman out of there, and you're going to have a far better chance. Not only that, he'll probably win for you. As far as advice going forward goes, it is such a different marketplace landscape in pro sports right now. I think that you can't try and compete with MLS if you're an indoor soccer league. You have to celebrate the game. and you have to, find a way to zoom in on your target market. And one of the things we had going for us back in the 80s was we were the first sport to do all the theatrics. The players coming through the soccer sign with the smoke and the lights, and we were criticized for that. I remember Sports Illustrated writing an article about this hokey league and how they're cheapening the sport by having all these light shows and lasers and things like that. If you don't do that now, your fans feel like they're getting cheated because they're not getting their money's worth. And soccer, in particular indoor soccer, was ahead of its time doing all that. So I don't know what that next innovation could be, where the indoor league could separate itself from the rest of pro sports. The days of just smoking and neon are over, because, as I said, everybody does that now. But stay true to what the indoor game is, and I think above all, build up the personalities of these players as best you can, because we had some amazing ones from the guys we've talked about, and many, many more over the years. And it was really the personalities and how they connected with the fans that made the indoor game unique. And that may be a formula going forward, but I'm far from an expert. That was a long time ago.
Oh, no, but you know what? Music to my ears, though, because one of the things you just said is something that I've talked about to ownership groups in the league and ours as well, which is that so many times people in arena soccer, indoor soccer, try to recreate the 80s. I'm using air quotes for those listening on the podcast. And what was being done in the 80s was not trying to recreate the 50s. You know what I'm saying? It was new. It was right then, and it was modern. And I feel like so many times indoor soccer is just trying to create the feeling like it was in 1986 to go to a game. And I say, wait, create the situation for 2020 going to a game. What's new and what's now right now? Be avant-garde. Take a risk, because it's a very fair point you make there, Randy. People at the time didn't say right away, oh, this is new, this is innovative. It's more like, what? And it was maybe thought of, as you said, as a little hokey.
Yeah, and you look at the individuals who created that newness with the game presentation and all that, and my memory tells me that the people that were the best at it were the Liwikis in Kansas City. And now you look 30 years later at where the Liwikis are, and they are in some of the cutting edge areas in pro sports today. So, watch what the Seattle Kraken do in the NHL, because Liwiki is there, and you'll get a sense of these innovators in marketing and reaching sports fans in new and innovative ways, which they did back in the 80s with the game presentation. And it wouldn't be surprising to me at all, whether it's through digital media or however they accomplish it, that they find another new way to break through. That's a team to watch, how they're marketed and how their fans are entertained before, during, and after games, and even in off seasons with social media and digital platforms. It'll be interesting to watch what they do there.
Very last thing for you, our kicker question, so to speak. I can't let you go without asking about one for the thumb. One of the most innovative music videos. I mean, the time of the Super Bowl Shuffle, but you got to be the Grandmaster Flash of your time. You had the rap.
Hey, San Diego, what's got you down? Do you need a winning team for a winning town? Then there's one thing I know for sure. A soccer's game is a miracle cure. Come on, sports fans, don't be glum. We've got the team that's number one. If you're down and feeling blue, ask Dr. Coker what to do.
Take this tonight and call me in the morning, cause you want more than have it for me.
We're the Sockers, golden blue. World championships are nothing new. We've won 1, 2, 3, and more. But we're not done, we want some more. 4 rings to show that we're the best. Room for one more is all that's left. So come and join us in the fun. We're gonna get one for the thumb.
We continue to go back to this as one of the most incredible parts of soccer's lore. Give me at least a little bit about how that all came together.
No, it was so much fun, and it certainly was spurred by the Super Bowl Shuffle. Jim McMahon and the Chicago Bears. I think that was the '85 Super Bowl team, and it was after that. And I was the PR director and broadcaster at the time, And we thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a music video? And then a couple of fans who were also in music production wrote the song, and then we recorded it. And I'm actually on the recording to some degree. It was recorded at the radio station. And then we went about trying to find a way to make this video with no budget, like zero. It was all donated. If we spent even $500 on that thing, I would be stunned. And somehow, I forget how we pulled it all together, but we called in all our favors and all the resources and got the players to commit to spending half a day there. And it turned out as it turned out. Probably the unknown story of that is after, we sold the videos and they were available to the fans, but we also cut, I believe, 7,045 records, 45 RPM singles. And no one wanted to buy those because everybody just wanted the video.
Yeah.
So we had all this money sunk into cutting these records, and no one we reduced the price. And if you bought a video, you got a free record, and we got rid of some of them that way. But we probably still had 5,000 or 6,000 of these records stacked in the Soccer's offices at the sports arena. And as fate would have it, one day there was a plumbing malfunction in the offices, and there was a huge flood, and it was nasty. It was a sewer line that broke. So this was raw sewage that flooded the Soccer's offices, and all the records were damaged in the flood, and the Soccer's got to claim them all on insurance.
Oh, that is tremendous. Randy, thank you so much. Hacksaw would say a trip down memory lane, but that's what we did here.
Hello, Escondido. Hello, Lemon Grove. Hello, La Mesa.
He's still kicking around. Thank you so much. I hope you had as much fun as we did talking about your old Soccer's days. Best of luck going forward with the Sharks, and I certainly hope for a post-pandemic future where I'll get a chance to come by and cruise that press box and say hello in person.
Absolutely, and I must add, the Soccers have invited me for some alumni events in the past, and just with the NHL schedule, I haven't been able to attend, but I'd sure love to again sometime. And just for any and all of the fans out there who are watching or listening to this that may have been from that era when there was so much success, great to connect with you again. It was one of the most exciting and important phases of my life, and I loved every minute of it.
Randy Hahn on our Soccer's Overtime Legends series. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.